Okay, I'm John Leung, and this is Mike Raineri, representing Intel and Dell. I'm also the steering committee rep at OCP for hardware management, so I oversee the project leads and try to direct them in the right direction. So very large diagram you saw Hemel display. I kind of keep that going if possible. So. I'm going to talk to you about OCP profiles, and we'll start with talking about what Redfish is, what profiles are, and what OCP profiles are. So Redfish is a RESTful interface, so it has basically reduced manageability to a URI and a package that gets returned. So as part of that package is an ASCII file of text, which has name-value pairs. And that's the definition, and it's defined by schema. So you can look at Redfish as a bunch of paths that go throughout the model, and each path request gets you an object of a bunch of name-value pairs. So based on that, what the DMTF does is it tries to enlarge that model. It enlarges it from servers to storage to network to fabrics to DSIM, which is all the equipment on the side of the platform, all the way to other industries who have come in and said, oh, well, this is nice. We can use it in process automation. So Redfish is being used for the automated factory. And so each one has written its own profile. And what profiles do is they say, well, this mass of Redfish is getting larger and larger every day. How can we find a subset that we actually need within our management domain? So OCP came in and said, we want to define profiles that reduce the amount of Redfish implementation necessary for just for the data center and AI data center. So that's the creation of what Redfish is, what the Redfish profile does, and why we have OCP profiles. So this is a diagram at the lower bottom right of what occurred 7 years ago. So walked into OCP and said, with Redfish, you can find a baseline profile, which is a baseline set of manageability for all OCP platforms. So whether you're a switch, a server, or storage, you can, from a manager, always expect this type of manageability. And so if you're a server, then you can extend the baseline and do server stuff. So you've got CPUs, you've got a memory, you can extend the Redfish model. And we did that to all the existing projects at the time. Since then, OCP has greatly enlarged. And so today, we have something that looks like this. So we have we still have the baseline, which we've updated and we'll talk about today. We have the server profile immediately north of it, which is the extension of the baseline to server. We've now extended to Rack Manager. So those three, which with boldface blocks on them, are all existing today and released. What we've done is that there have been other organizations that have come in and said, well, you understand servers and racks. You know nothing about CDUs and cooling equipment. And we said, you're right. So you create a work stream, and you guys define what the use cases are that are necessary and what models are necessary in cooling environments, and then you guys will help you write a profile. So in the gray block on the right is exactly that. It's within the cooling environment project. It is called the Hardware Management for Liquid Cooling workstream. And so they use their subject matter expertise on cooling environments to define the baseline for all cooling equipment. And then they extended that for CDUs, for rear-door heat exchangers, and as they mentioned yesterday, they're extending that to immersion tanks. Okay? On the right-hand side of that is, immediately above it is the power guys who've come in and said, well, we need to extend, we need profiles for the power shelf and the rack PDU. So with Redfish, at this point, you can manage the platform and the rack and all the accompanying things within the rack, the cooling subsystem, the power subsystem. Okay? So what we found was that the baseline had a number of Redfish service requirements, and as these other domains of manageability were created. They said, we want a common service baseline. We don't want to reference your baseline because you have a bunch of stuff that only applies to platforms, whether they be server or storage, and we want something even below that. So we'll talk about that later today. And the last is sustainability. So sustainability came in and said, we need profiles. We're going to redefine PUE, and we're going to have more, in the PUE, new PUE calculation will have specific algorithm with specific inputs. And all I said to them was, fine, have your specific inputs, but make sure that they are part of the Redfish model so they become part of the baseline. So every server and every entity within the OCP data center has at least one resource, one property it needs in order to fulfill your calculation. And that way you can actually make your calculation across the entire data center because this common property, whether it be power utilization or whatever, is identical across the entire data center. Okay? So what we do with the baseline. So what we did with the baseline is basically it's a bunch of account manageability, some hardware inventory stuff, power and temperature, cooling. And this is, every platform needs to have this, the ability to reset the platform. And what we did with change from 1.0 to 1.1 is the Redfish model went and changed. The Redfish model had this very simplistic power and thermal model when it went out 7 years ago. And so since then, they've gone to a much more resilient and robust model called the power subsystem and the thermal subsystem. And we basically allow version 1.1 to either use the, quote, deprecated old model or the new model and still be conformant to the entire profile itself. You'll also notice with him there's a kind of things that don't have to exist in a platform, but exist because you're a Redfish implementation, namely account service, and session service, and log service, and those are annotated with a 1. So this is an overlap, and this is where the other domains came in and said, we want that. We don't want the rest of this stuff because we have different types of power and thermal models that we need to go implement. And so we extract some of that, put that in a service profile, and then we will have the baseline just reference the service profile as opposed to carrying all that stuff forward. Okay? With that, I'll let Mike go dig into the service profile.
All right, thanks, John. So as John kind of mentioned, we have a bit of overlap now between what's in the platform baseline profile with the service baseline profile. So the intent of the service baseline profile is to allow any adopter of Redfish, regardless of whether they're a platform, a pure software entity, or any type of application. These are all the common types of housekeeping functions that you will find on Redfish regardless of what you are. So items like user account management, that's going to be mandatory across the board regardless of the type of equipment you are. You have other housekeeping functions like certificate management, since in the specification it's required to be able to replace the web service certificate of your service. So keeping that consistent for everyone to be mandatory. Event notifications is listed here as mandatory. There's been a lot of need, especially in the telemetry space, for being able to broadcast alerts and events for any type of issue that's happening in the data center. Then you have all of your manager IP configuration types of changes. This is to ensure that when you have a service that you've provisioned, are you going to be able to let your user discover and configure its IP address? Licensing management, not mandatory. It's recommended if your product happens to have licensed features. So if you do have the capability of installing a software license, then you would need to implement the license management portions of the data model. Event logging, that's also another mandatory aspect of the service baseline profile. So any types of events that happen that are observed, being able to have that persistent log to retrieve that in the future is necessary. And software management, this also goes into firmware updates. So if you have the if you will have to implement the APIs to perform push updates or pull updates, being able to just deploy new software or firmware to your service. Then you have your protocol configurations. Maybe they're statically set and you don't allow a user to patch them, but at least being able to report outwards, do you support HTTP, HTTPS, do you support SSH, having all those visible to the user. Service conditions is a recommended function. It's a fairly, I guess it's a few years old at this point, but it's a consolidated list of any of the alerts that are currently active on your service. Not mandatory, but it's highly desirable regardless of the type of product you are. Then you also have registered clients, which is a kind of a bookkeeping place for clients to notify and let others see their presence in the service. So if you're a client that's actively managing or monitoring a server and you want to make sure that you're not disturbed, there's a little place in the data model to let others know that you're currently using the system and maybe some of the operations they may do are disruptive. Then you have session management. This is simply mandatory in the Redfish spec. So just making sure that the data model's in place to support all clients using Redfish sessions. And then you have task management. So this is really going to be optional dependent on the design of your service. If you have long-running asynchronous operations supported, then this is something you will need to implement. But if by any chance every operation you support is synchronous, then there's no need to support it. So going into a little bit of the way profiles reference one another, there's a very simple grammar within the profile to reference other profiles. So usually you'll find a term called required profiles inside the JSON file, and in there it lists all the profiles that your profile is based upon. So in this case, if you want to include the service baseline profile, within the required profiles block, you'll include the name of the profile, which in this case is called OCP Service Baseline. It also allows you to specify the minimum version of the profile that you need to include. So kind of the structure we have in place going forward is the server profile that we have in OCP right now. It inherits from the platform baseline profile, and in the future it will eventually reference the service baseline profile. So you have a kind of a tier effect of defining your requirements for a platform. Moving on, so we make all these profiles. They're all JSON encoded. So the question is, well, what do you do from there? It's not just documentation. It's also used to validate your service. And so there is a tool published by DMTF called the Redfish Interop Validator. You point the tool to a service, you give it a profile, and it'll go off and test the conformance of the unit under test. It's freely available on GitHub. You can also install it through the Python package index. So using pip, you can install the Redfish Interop Validator, and it's really just you invoke the tool as RF Interop Validator, give it the username, password, a pointer to the service, and the profile that you want to test it with. And so the result of this is you get an HTML report that shows how well the service conformed to the profile. On the left, you have the kind of the heading of the HTML report, which shows you the unit under test, which profile it ran against, and a summary of the results to show just kind of at a high level the metrics for how well the service conformed. And then the remainder of the report is broken down into all the URIs found for testing against the profile, and it breaks it down into each of the properties that are inspected for testing. So you'll see all the different requirements specified in the profile for the resource. You'll see which ones are mandatory, which ones are recommended, which ones are not applicable. You'll see required values, and on the right side it will tell you whether or not the property passed conformance or not. So with our call to action, please use the baseline management profile and test it against your service. So we want to make sure that the requirements that we put into the baseline profile are pretty low bar, so that way everyone can easily adopt Redfish and implement it into their products. If there's any issues, there's a GitHub repository for the OCP profiles workstream, and feel free to file issues, and they'll tell us to go review our existing requirements and make changes as needed. So the last ask is to, if you're working in a manageability workstream, we want to make sure that you're building upon the profiles that we're providing. So John mentioned that the hardware management liquid cooling workstream is defining their own profiles based on the service baseline. So please leverage the work we're doing and contribute back to our project. All right. So from there, we'll take questions.
Let's thank Mike and John, and we have time for questions. Please come to Mike if you have a question.
Hi, hello. Thank you for the presentation, Vincent from Stoltz. So recently we're looking at Redfish protocol for CDUs. In your presentation, it's only read and no write. I just want to understand where that phase is. When will Redfish be using for both read and write for cooling applications?
Do you mean specifically for configuring new set points in a CDU?
Correct.
We'd probably need feedback from the liquid cooling management work stream. I don't have any plans myself, but a lot of that's going to be driven based on requirements coming out of that working group.
Which worker group again?
The liquid cooling hardware management
Okay,
work stream.
thank you very much.
Yeah, and that's why we bend to the subject matter experts in cooling environments. So when they say it's time to do that, they'll update the profile to actually enter it. So I'm actually surprised. I've been in those meetings, and they've actually talked about exactly that, was how do we change things and how do you do writes on them. So
Okay.
I think that conversation is actively occurring.
Now, if you're implementing a CDU and the Redfish service for it, there's no reason you couldn't go ahead and implement the configuration support. The profile is just the baseline requirements, and you can build on top of that for other things you find valuable for your product.
Understood. That just more of a testing and validation, making sure things works and stuff.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and one thing I would mention is that there are a number of tables that we had shown. Those are taken directly out of the usage guide, and the usage guide is all posted on OCP. And the usage guide takes each one of those lines and points you to exactly what the Redfish interaction is, what RESTful command you have, and what comes back. So it gives you a fairly good walkthrough as to what the interaction would be across your Redfish interface.
Yeah, Navin from AMD. In the last year OCP, I remember there was an OCP Redfish interoperability profile, some version 1.0, and then we did some conformance tests against some products, got some complaints. So is this profile, baseline profile, related to that somehow, or how do I understand that?
It is. So what you've noticed is that we're trying to break down profiles for more reuse in other programs. And so the profile you're referring to is probably a monolithic server profile. So over time, we're going to be pulling requirements out of that profile, move them down into the baseline profile, and then have the server profile reference the baseline. So that way, you can keep the higher order product as minimal as possible while leveraging as much commonality.
So can I understand it like modularizing them and then keep them like an overlay, build a bigger one?
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. So I think your question was about version 1.0 of the baseline, which was presented, and this version being 1.1. So the way we in the standards world have a very strict way we do revisions, and so a high-level revision like 1.0 or 2.0 means that the client actually has to change code to go from 1.0 to 2.0. From 1.0 to 1.1 means the client doesn't need to change code, and it should just work. If he wants to use the additional functionalities that happen to come with .1, he may have to change code. But but the job of standards is not to go break things every time we do a release. So that's why I talked about deprecation, which means that if you did the old power cooling resource, that's okay, you'll still pass. But if you do the new power subsystem, cooling subsystem, you'll still pass. If you get the old one, it will pass, but it may give you a warning. So, this is a deprecated resource, but it won't affect the conformance side of it as far as failing.
So, Hari from Microsoft. So I have two-part questions. The first one is basically, we are trying to use the profiles, I think last year for checking the compliance. And the current compile, like as I know, the base profile is sort of made it at the bottom level, like we are actually make it as simple. But we are very interested to actually have complex profiles, which actually uses properties, cross properties to actually verify, qualify URIs, and use those qualification to actually further verify and test within that profile, the Redfish profile. So currently at the Redfish profile is set at Redfish V1 level. We wanted to see whether can we actually push this down into individual branches, because in some of the things where we have mixed systems like GPU, storage, IO, and all these things, we cannot actually sort of create one single pedigree saying the server, because that doesn't hold anymore. So if that is something which you guys can sort of talk about, that's the question number one. The question number two is the message registry, which is sort of a last section of Orphan. Is there a possibility that we can actually have a simple test like a submit test event, which the tool can do to actually say whether the BMC even supports that message registry in the first place?
Okay. So for your first question, so on the baseline profiles, I don't expect much uptick in this usage. But as you start moving up the stack for more specific products, there are structures in the profile called use cases that allow you to break out saying, well, this is a system CPU, so therefore only test these requirements. This is a GPU, so these requirements apply. So it allows you to be able to apply a bit more context to the unit under test, and making sure that you have a kind of a mix of requirements across heterogeneous equipment. For your other question, there is grammar in the profile to specify which message registries and messages are supported. There are ways in the event service to advertise what registries it supports. It's kind of on the honor system at that point. As far as testing with submit test event goes, the expectation I have with submit test event is that it's really just it echoes back whatever the user provides. It may not, you could provide nonsensical event information and still just pass that back as is. So I don't think it's at this time it's not really a good way to test that. So, but I'm open to ideas for how we could close that gap in testing though.
So
One follow?
So if you think it's useful for you to have a test event which says, hey, can you send me every message in the message registry, right? Just so I can test it on the client side, that I can receive it and I decode it correctly, then that would be fairly something simple to do, right? You just have to tell us what the fake values are that we need to send back.
So the one thing is the current JSON construct of the Redfish RIP profile. If I did the full honest analysis and actually for a server, I was able to create 500,000 lines of a JSON file. So is there something where we can actually, the RIP profiles can actually talk about hierarchy of profiles which aggregate together? I'm just asking, like, is it possible to split it? Because currently
yeah.
everything comes in.
Absolutely.
Yes,
You
that's
First of all, your time is way up.
Yeah.
But thank you for the question.
Thank you.
I'll meet outside and you can probably take care of it.